Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to give it a moment while I can see the numbers still ticking up. My name's Jon Myers, and obviously I'm your host for the day. I just want to give a chance for obviously all you guys that are coming in to listen to come in. I can just see at the bottom of the screen there's more and more people coming in as I speak. So give it about 10 seconds, and then we'll get into this very apt subject for the time of year, and hopefully can take you through some really handy tips and tricks and things to think about. Obviously going into e-commerce peak as such, I would say. So we'll give it another 10 seconds and then we'll be straight with you guys. Okay, well, let's get going. As mentioned, if you were one of the first in, obviously hi and welcome to the next in the series of the Deep Crawl webinars. My name is Jon Myers. I'm your host today, and obviously if you've been here before, you've probably seen me and know very much how we get into these sorts of things for the next 45 minutes. But just to reiterate, if you're new and you're coming in fresh onto this side of things, we've got a fantastic subject for you today and a brilliant presenter as well. So no pressure on our presenter today. We're going to talk about all things SEO and obviously how to structure your e-commerce website for success. Obviously Dan Cartland, who is the head of SEO and strategy at NOVOS, is going to be presenting with us today. Welcome to the webinar, Dan, and thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. As usual, as I mentioned, we're going to follow a very similar format to what we normally do. We're going to make it a little bit more interactive today, and so we're going to have around about 20 minutes of presentation, max, from Dan, who's going to talk us through some things to think about, some areas that might have some pitfalls. As we know, I mean, we're coming into obviously the US Thanksgiving next week. We've got Black Fridays that start to kick in. We've got Christmas around the corner. Then we're into January sales. So this time of year, from an e-commerce point of view and an e-commerce site point of view, is incredibly important for key success metrics for the whole year in some respects. So after that sort of 20 minutes of Dan and doing his slides, myself and Dan are going to get into some Q&A around things to think about from an e-commerce SEO point of view. But obviously we want you guys involved as well. So as normal, please do submit some questions. Whack them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, obviously on Zoom. I can then pick those questions up. I can regurgitate that, and me and Dan or Dan can get into answering those questions for you, seeing as he is our speaker today. As always, we are recording this session. So as you can imagine, if you miss anything, we will have a full write-up on the Deep Crawl blog as of tomorrow. You'll be able to play back the whole session. We'll give you all the bits and bobs that you need, and obviously answer all the questions that we couldn't answer in the time today. We'll get those answers for you and get them over to you as well. On top of that, obviously, please, we are massive on feedback. We want to know how well we're doing with these webinars. And as I've mentioned in the past, tell us if we're doing a great job. Tell us if we're not doing a great job. Suggest things that we could introduce, or topics or speakers or anything like that. So there will be a window at the end of the webinar which pops up. It's about 15 seconds of your time. So please take the opportunity when you log out to just give us that feedback, because we do appreciate it, obviously, down here at Deep Crawl. All right, we've got a fantastic topic, which is obviously how to structure your e-commerce website for success. We've got a fantastic speaker, Mr. Dan Cartland, who's the head of SEO at NOVOS. So without further ado, I want to get into this content. So the floor is yours, Dan, and please do get those questions in as Dan goes. If something pops up, pop us a question in, and we'll absolutely make sure it gets answered for you after the presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Dan.
Cheers. Yeah, thanks for having me. Here to talk today about how to structure your e-commerce website for success. Now, NOVOS is an e-com specific SEO agency. So we deal with hundreds of different types of sites across all niches, all different sizes. And so we know a thing or two about the common errors that sites make and the common opportunities that we see as we review websites. So today we're going to run through general site structure, things to get right, things to think about as you're setting up your site. Before moving on to SEO processes, and these can be key to make sure that you take advantage of particular dates, such as holidays, but also you're keeping your site lean. You're not introducing lots of new pages, for example, with products. Before moving on to how to utilize supporting content, it's not all about the transactional categories and product pages. Supporting content definitely has its place in building a good site structure. Before moving on to making sure you keep the customer at the center of everything you do. So kicking off with site structure, the first point I want to touch upon is making sure your categories and subcategories are targeted at the correct level. So more on the information architecture side of things. By this, I mean, you want to make sure your categories are targeted specific enough to reach your audience without being too specific that you're making your site massive, and without being too broad that actually you're never going to rank among the competitors that you're up against. This is really common when we analyze websites. We see that, for example, if they're selling t-shirts, they might have a category for t-shirts, and that's it. And no surprise, they're not ranking very well with that category. It's far too broad. It's not specific enough. On the other side of things, you might have websites that go really, really specific, normally due to their filter setup, where you have sort of like 3 to 4 different subcategory deep folders, in which case, yeah, it's far too specific. There's no reason for it. And I think filters are a massive sort of cause of this. So you do really want to make sure that you're targeting at the correct level. I know the correct level is quite a broad sort of term, but it will differ between websites, depending on how large your website is, depending on how much existing authority your website has, and also depending on your niche. So it really does depend on like multiple factors. And it's always worth testing as you go. That we've worked with sites that we opened up their filters, indexed their filters to target more specific terms. And actually what happened instead is they got less traffic. Their rankings dropped simply because it didn't have enough authority for those filter pages to rank. But equally, we've worked on sites where they've opened up their filters to be indexed, and actually they've had a really good benefit from it. So it does depend. And if you are unsure, test, do some research. How are people searching for your products? And do you have categories and subcategories to target how they search? Moving on. You want to create pages to target your USPs. Now, almost every business e-com website has specific USPs. Things like, do you sell only vegan products? Are you fully sustainable? But often it's only the brand team that really know about these. It's not clear for customers, people that haven't visited your website before or don't know your brand inside out. It's not clear that these are your USPs. And so it's not going to be clear for search engines, and thus you won't rank for related terms, related modifiers that people are searching for. So you really want to get your USPs front and center. I think there's 2 different ways to do this. One of which is to create specific pages that really dive into the details. It's not enough to just say, we're sustainable. How are you sustainable? Like, why is it important to you? How is the brand living that value? The benefit of this is the expertise that shows, the relevance that shows will be passed around your site. Google will start seeing you as an authority within that space, and you're more likely to rank for related terms to that USP. You also want to be thinking about how to optimize your categories within those. So if you are vegan, it's worth thinking, should you be optimizing your page titles, H1s, of your core categories towards that USP? That way you're going to start to rank for more of those related terms, get in front of the customers that are really interested in those type of products. So therefore likely to rank for more keywords, and also get in front of the customers that are more likely to convert as well. Use internal linking. Now, we could probably talk about internal linking on its own for the full sort of 45 minutes. The important thing in this regard is to make sure you're using internal linking to make it easy for your customers to navigate your site. In turn, this will make it easy for search engines to navigate your site. One thing that we love recommending at NOVOS is implementing breadcrumbs, particularly on product pages. Sometimes you get a bit of pushback from clients saying it's not good for UX. It doesn't look good on a mobile screen. But in fact, research has shown it is really good for customer experience. If they land on a product page, they're interested in the general type of product, but maybe that product itself isn't to their interest, they can really easily navigate up to a broader category, see more of a browsing intent, see what else is on your website, more likely to then find something they are interested in and go on to convert. You also want to think about things like, what are you linking to in your global navigation? You don't want to be linking to every single category on your website. if you show everything, you show nothing. Not only is it not beneficial for SEO because there's no sort of relative importance of your core pages, but it's also choice overload for customers. They won't know what to click on, and so they end up not knowing where to navigate, and it's a poor experience. And as part of this, but we've called it out in particular because it is one of the most important pages on any e-com site. Make sure you're linking to core categories from your homepage. It's absolutely fine to talk about like branded topics. It's fine to talk about who you are and link to those USP pages, which hopefully by now you would have created. But you also want to be pushing customers through to your core pages and using like the authority that a homepage has in an SEO sense to help your core pages to rank by linking to them. On this point, it's also really beneficial to think about what text you're using to link to those pages, what anchor text you're using to link to your core pages. We often see a lot of read more anchor text, a lot of shop here, and that doesn't give any context to customers or to search engines about what those pages are about, what they're linking to. So utilize your anchor text to get the most benefit from your homepage linking. You really want somebody that's never been on your site before to land on your homepage and immediately know what you do, what you sell, and what your core products are. Moving on to some SEO processes, and the first of which is obviously very relevant for this time of year, around holiday targeting. Now, when you're targeting holidays, you want to create a specific URL for that holiday and to keep that for the rest of time. You don't want to be creating a new one every year. You definitely want to avoid having the date in the URL. The reason being, if you have one page undated that you keep every year it's building more and more authority from the relevance it gets from Google, from the backlinks it acquires over time. Your customers might bookmark it. It's better overall. You maintain all the value, and you don't have to start again each year trying to rank, trying to get in the index. You've got a running start if you keep the URL. It's worth mentioning, this doesn't mean you can't target the year on the page itself. You absolutely can target like 2021 in the page title, in the H1, but make sure it's updated every year and make sure you don't put the date in the URL itself. In terms of other processes, you also want to think about when interest in specific holidays starts to increase. So you don't want to be thinking about linking to your Black Friday page a week before Black Friday. By that point, people have already been searching for a couple of weeks. They already might know the things they're interested in, the websites that have good offers on. So you want to think about when does search interest start to creep up, and start to think about linking to your Black Friday page around that time. Where you link to it as well is really important. Definitely get something on the homepage, add it into the global navigation in the run-up, but after the event itself, make sure to remove it from those locations so you're not sort of wasting any value to those pages after they have been relevant. Outside of the season as well, you want to think about what you're going to do with these pages. We don't want to 404 them. We want to keep them live throughout the year, but you don't want to be linking to them. You might want to put an email capture on there in case somebody does land on there out of season. So you're still making use of the page. You might also want to link to other core categories, more evergreen categories. So if somebody does land on the Black Friday page in the middle of February, you can direct them to other areas that they might be interested in. That way, you've still got value for these pages. You want to make sure you're not 404ing them. You're not letting them die. You want to keep all the authority, keep them live, but just don't link to them when they're out of season. You want to also have a clear strategy for dealing with out-of-stock products and how you deal with products in general, including launching fresh new products. So when products go out of stock, there are a few different reasons a product might go out of stock. It might be that it's been discontinued, in which case you want to decide, okay, are people still searching for this product? If they are still searching for the product, you might want to keep the page live, even though you're no longer selling it. That way, again, you can direct them to other relevant pages. If they've been discontinued, but actually people aren't really searching for them in search engines, they're not really searching for them in internal search, you might then want to look to redirect it to its next most relevant page on the site. That way you're keeping the authority of the page without overloading your site over time with loads and loads of discontinued products. If a product's just gone out of stock and is going to return in stock, again, you might want to keep that live, but have an email capture so you can tell customers when it's likely to be back in stock. And again, you might want to link to related products. So even though the current one they're after isn't in stock, there are other options available which might interest them. Again, always thinking about the customer, what will be beneficial to them, what might keep them on that sort of conversion path. In terms of product launches, again, you want to be launching products with SEO in mind. And this ties into some of the information architecture pieces I was talking about earlier. If you're launching a new product in a completely different category, you want to understand how people are searching for that, what types of pages they want to land on as they're searching for these types of products, making sure it doesn't compete with other existing categories on your site, other products on your site, making sure it has its own space and is optimized to how people search. It's much better to launch with SEO in mind rather than launching a product, it not doing too well, you've missed some deadlines, you've missed some targets, and then you're trying to scramble a few months later to optimize it for the organic search side of things. Utilize supporting content. And supporting content isn't creating blogs for blog's sake. It's not creating 500-word articles en masse that don't really target anything and are just to hit some marketing KPI. What you really want to do is plot out your customer journey. What are they searching for at different stages? What are they searching for before they even know that your product is an answer to that problem? You'll be creating this content all the way through the funnel. What are they researching? What is making them aware of your product? How are they converting? What type of considerations do they have as they're searching? The reason for this, it means that one, you're more likely to reach more people which could become customers. You're reaching them at different stages, which then gets them onto a conversion path. But also you're building the expertise around your products. Search engines begin to see that, oh, this website, this e-com website knows everything there is to know about leather shoes or flowers, for example. In that sense, they're more likely to then rank your transactional pages, your products, your categories for competitive terms because they know you're providing all the information that's needed. You're most likely to give customers, searchers what they want when they land on your website. It's also worth thinking about the different journeys that your customers can have. If you're selling something that's sustainable, one path might be somebody that's interested in increasing their sustainability and living a more sustainable life. But if you're selling sustainable shoes, they also might just be interested in getting a nice pair of shoes, and they're completely different journeys. So you want to be thinking about the different types of content you can create to align with those journeys. Something we often see is a neglect of post-transactional, post-conversion content on the site. And it's quite easy to see why. If you've got a budget, you want to target customers that maybe you haven't reached before. But there's definitely value in investing in content that keeps your customers you already have happy, keeps them on your website, answers their problems if any occur. So you're not always chasing the new users. You might want to invest a bit of money in your post-conversion content to keep those customers happy, keep those returning customers, and the lifetime value of your customers high. You also want to create content specific to your core categories. And this does tie into the previous slide. But we work with a lot of clients who have seen increases to their transactional pages through creating content that support that journey that are related to their specific core categories. Building out their expertise really does have an impact. It can reach more customers, but it can also really help to support your transactional pages and help them to rank better as well. So it's really a double benefit. In terms of the type of content you want to create as well, you want to understand what is best for your customer. As I say, you don't always want to be creating 500-word blog posts. You don't always want to be creating long-form guides. If the question is how to tie a shoelace, a quick three-point list might be the best for your customer. I think we've all been on the recipe type pages where before you get to know the lovely recipe, you've got to go through somebody's life story. how they found out about the cake, why they love cakes, why their family always like baking cakes, before finally getting to the ingredients and how to bake something. It's the same type of concept here. You want to create the type of content that most easily and readily answers your customer needs, but also what search engines are rewarding. And in theory, this should be very similar because search engines, Google should be returning results that best answer the intent behind a search. So if Google is rewarding a listicle, you might want to think about creating a listicle for that type of query. If it's returning video results, again, you might want to think about creating video results instead, but structuring your content first and foremost with your customer in mind, but also informed by Google. This leads us to the final point before we sort of open up the chat and the discussion. A lot of the things we've discussed and spoken about are great. They're really beneficial for search engines, but you always want to be thinking about your customer. And a lot of changes previously, like historically for SEO, have been more focused on Googlebot, on Bingbot. You know, what the bot's going to like, what's going to get us higher rankings. But actually, I think the future of search is more about, you know, what does the customer need? What best answers the customer's searches, the customer queries, and by optimizing towards that approach, you will also be optimizing towards organic search. And I think it's more of a sort of a longer term strategy that will keep your site ranking, keep your e-com site generating sales well into the future.
Brilliant, Dan. Thank you very much. I think it's important. If you go back up one slide, that would be fantastic, and we'll get to that slide as the final one. But I think it's really important to stick with this the customer centric piece, because I absolutely agree with you. I think gone are the days of just kind of thinking about what ranks as highest and how we go about getting those rankings on keywords that might think are relevant, that are not relevant, and that don't convert to sales and do all these different things. It's a very, very different ball game out there. And I can already see some questions coming in the chat box kind of thing, so which is great to see. And some of you guys are answering them as well while we go, which is even better. So we'll give a view on some of those as well. But obviously, as we get into this, you know, as I say, there's the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Any questions that you guys have, please get those questions into there, and we can talk about it a little bit more. I'll come to the ones that are going on, obviously, on the chat at the moment. But I think it was interesting right back at the start of the presentation, Dan, you talked about filters and filter pages. I think it'd be great if you give some tips and some views on what's the best way to go about doing that, because not necessarily everybody would kind of think about, you know, actually turning on filters. If somebody's new to that and with an e-com site, what would you say are the best things to think about as you go down that process? Because as you said, it's a minefield. You can see it actually having a negative effect as much as a positive effect. So if you were to say, analyze these three things before you go and flick that switch to make sure it's going to be a positive effect rather than a negative effect, what would, you know, your view be on that?
Yeah, I think, like, firstly, I think filters are, I would always recommend an e-com site having filters. They are good for customers. They are good for the customer experience. So yeah, firstly, you do want filters on your site. I think, yeah, how do you make sure it's good for SEO? I think you need to understand, are they being crawled? Firstly, have you opened up to be crawled? By that, you want to, you know, use something like deep crawl, a crawler like deep crawl to understand, you know, have you opened these URLs up to be crawled? And most of the time, the reason there's such an issue is because with filters, you can often have several attributes which can then be sort of applied in any order. So you could have attribute 1, 2, and 3, attribute 2, 1, and 3, attribute 3, 2, and 1, which all create different URLs. So you very quickly, with like 10 different filters, you very quickly have like into the thousands, hundreds of thousands of URLs that could be crawled, could be created. So it's about understanding first, you know, are they open to be crawled? At that point, you understand, are the filters you're applying, do they change the page title? Do they change the H1? Do they change the content on the page? So are you actually optimizing any of your filter pages for keywords you want to target? If you're not, my recommendation would probably be to just blanket block all of them, because they're of no benefit. If they do change the targeting of the page, you then want to put in rules in place to understand which ones are beneficial targeting and which ones are not beneficial targeting. For example, if you're a closed store, you might have a reason to have pages, filter pages created that target color variants like black t-shirts, white t-shirts. But chances are you won't want filter pages that target size variants like large, medium, small. And so it's understanding and putting rules in place to manage which pages are crawled, which pages can then be indexed and rank. The other option is you can just create sort of static categories, subcategories. That is an option if you don't want to deal with indexing filters. It does get very complex very quickly. An easier way from an SEO perspective is to create static categories, subcategories, which then you don't have to worry about it in the same way.
No, which I think is a really good point. I think categories is another thing which I want to talk about in a moment, because I want to jump into I'm watching a great conversation going on in the chat box at the moment, kind of thing around redirects and stuff like the age old. How do we deal with redirects? And Michael and James are having quite a good debate over here on this one at the moment on the side of the box. I know we've been following it down, but James has been while you've been talking, James has been asking the question about actually redirecting a URL. And obviously in ecom, when we think about things like going out of stock and various things, so James is asking the question of how much does redirecting a URL affect that page specifically from a ranking perspective? One product will replace another, which is then replaced by another, and so on and so forth. And then obviously with James and Michael got into a conversation about chaining redirects or redirect chains, which obviously we know are just something we just really don't want to do. Because from an SEO perspective, that's just forget it. It's not going to do you any favors. But and it was a chain, even if it's just 2 chains long, which is 2 steps, which they're talking about at the moment. I absolutely agree, we shouldn't be doing, kind of thing. But what would your view be on just thinking about, obviously, as products go out of stock and we're redirecting a URL to another product page, what's the best way to go about that? And is there a loss of ranking? I mean, from my perspective, obviously, if we do this correctly and in the right way, then there's no effect on the page passing quality to the next page. But obviously keen to, as an e-commerce specialist, Dan, get your view on it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think I recently worked on a site that was migrating, and when I took a look at the existing redirects, there were hundreds. They were like 9-10 products pages chaining, which obviously after a while search engines just stop following. So actually, I think in the short term, it should be fine, but in the longer term, when you're getting like 9-10 redirects long, that is gonna the authority won't be passed, because search engines will stop crawling the pages and passing them along. I think I'd say if you are introducing products that are like exactly the same, like V1 of a product to V2 of a product, it's fine to redirect that. I think if you're doing it at scale, I'd maybe consider like redirecting to the category rather than the product level, simply because it's like there's so many that it's messy very quickly. I think if you've got to be careful as well. I mean, I think like there's something to be said, like pages can also 404. If you've got a huge turnover of stock and like you're creating loads of product pages, you might not be able to redirect every single one. If they don't have SEO value, they don't have backlinks, they don't have traffic, there is value, like there may be a case there to leave them to 404. I think redirect is always the primary approach, obviously. But we've worked on sites before where they had hundreds of thousands of redirects of products, and they're actually on Shopify. I think it's still in place, that 100K redirect limit. And so they were nearing that. And so we had to think, okay, right, we're gonna have to prioritize the redirects here. What are we gonna redirect? What are we not gonna redirect? I think, yeah. No,
I think it's a really interesting debate, and the guys are still talking about, which is great. I'm liking what I'm seeing over there on the side of the screen. But I think for me, it comes into things like crawl equity at the end of the day. Are we wasting actual crawl equity and affinity from a Google perspective by actually jumping through all these hoops constantly? It's making it harder for Google to process all of the information and deal with it. And actually, if anything, cleaning that up a little bit can really help with the whole process and streamline the actual crawl budget effectively, like how Google looks at it. I mean, we know that they treat now in a lot of respects they treat a 301 the same as they treat a 302. You don't, gone the days of saying, oh, they need 301s, you can't do 302s, but obviously a 302 is seen as a, effectively a non-permanent redirect. It's going to keep crawling it, and it's going to keep crawling it because it's expecting to see something different. So would you find a way of, obviously, is it a case of kind of going, well, these products are gone and they're never coming back, redirect to the category page. These products are out of stock for a week and they're going to come back, so let's just leave this temporary redirect in place and deal with it in that sense. So actually make it more of a business management case, and actually, ranking your products in order of things that are never coming back, or things that are back in a week, back in a month, or back when the supplier has them in stock, sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It's like, it always is just about having that process. So you do know in different scenarios what the plan is and what you are going to do, so it doesn't build up over time, and then you're left with thousands of pages crawlable that some are out of stock, some are redundant, some are historic. So yeah, I completely agree with that.
No, and I think it's good to flag as well, like, using something like a deep crawl, or, obviously from a crawling perspective, you can go crawl it and it'll flag a bunch of non-301 redirects. You might look at it and think, oh Christ, it's quite scary. You've got 4,000, 5,000 non-301 redirects in the crawl report. The reality is you just need to interrogate that information and look at it and see there might be a reason why it's not a 301 and it needs to be a 302, or a whole bunch of those could be cleaned up to a 301 and actually streamline your crawl budget with Google. Because I think for me that's a big part of just creating that strength and infrastructure within an e-com site, is how easily Google can navigate and find the information it needs to get.
Yeah, definitely. I think on this point, actually, like if some of the people that have joined have e-com sites and are thinking, oh, I haven't had these processes in place, using deep crawl to find something like orphan pages as well, orphan product pages that maybe have been left in the past, not been dealt with, and are no longer internally linked to on the site. You can find them and then put something in place, so you actually identify them. You're not just leaving it to Google to keep recrawling, keep finding, and actually they have no value. So yeah, that's another sort of little tip you can look to use deep crawl to identify.
No, I think absolutely agree. I think as well, for me, I'm starting to think about it a bit more. It'd be interesting because I think we have got a few retailers on here, kind of thing. I think it comes down to as well what sort of retail vertical you're in, because it's certain stocks that go out, go out of stock and come back into stock quite quickly, kind of thing. But there's only maybe one of them or two variants of that particular product. And as somebody rightfully mentioned on the side, if you can obviously suggest other products. So if a product's out of stock, here's a similar product, kind of thing, that you might be interested in.
Yeah.
But then you've got other types of sites on the other side of the fence. It could be things like car parts, where there's one make of car and there's 45 different derivatives of brake pads or clutches, or so when one's gone, is it better then to just say, well, it's not there, let's send them back up to the top level category page for Toyota cars and re-navigate through from there, because it just becomes a redirectional minefield.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is such a case by case, isn't it? Yeah, it's really interesting.
So, I mean, also, Dan, you talked about internal linking. We've just been talking about that a little bit, kind of thing. Is there any you talked about breadcrumbs as well. One thing I'd love to get your view on is, obviously, when I start thinking about things like breadcrumbs and different markups on pages, I start thinking about schema markup, and how I could best utilize that on sites when I'm doing SEO work for my clients, kind of thing. I've always seen great success and great wins in actually putting together those schema markups and putting those into Google and winning those sorts of extra rankings on top of obviously the page rankings, those extra call outs. Is there a view on from an e-commerce point of view, any quick wins you've seen from a schema markup point of view?
Yeah, I think I agree. I think schema markup can be really powerful, particularly if the schema markup does then give you some form of rich element within the SERPs as well. I think aggregate rating schema as an attribute of product schema, super powerful. If you can get review stars in there in the search results, I think your click-through rate is going to skyrocket. I think particularly if you're competing against aggregators or someone like Amazon, you really want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward and that you're showing the quality of your products via your own site. You're not letting Amazon show review stars and like almost like steal your clicks by not having it in there. Yeah, breadcrumbs as well can change the SERPs. Having the breadcrumb trail within the search results, make it a bit clearer for customers to know exactly where they're clicking through to, as well as things like in stock, out of stock schema to make sure that customers know, I want this product and it's in stock and I can see the price of it, and hopefully it's got the review stars there as well. Yeah, really, really powerful to drive more clicks. I've seen some success with FAQ page schema as well, marking up FAQs on category pages specifically, to pull through like a few common FAQs into the search results. Gives you a bit more real estate, can maybe answer some questions that customers might have before clicking through, maybe about your brand or about the products that you sell. What are the USPs maybe to include in the FAQs? And we've seen Google play around with different variants. I think before it was pulling through 5 questions, now it's pulling through 2, and it limits the number of results that can have a FAQ page schema. But we've definitely seen some success from getting some additional visibility off the back of that.
No, I totally agree. I think for me, it just means you can fill the real estate of the results page a little bit more with the things that you're doing, rather than just thinking about ranking the page for a specific keyword and getting involved with the questions. And the drop down side of things just really sort of reiterates and makes the brands have more sort of substance for the searcher, because actually they're seeing and answering all these questions. And FAQs is a great shout, because sometimes people don't think about using that from an e-com point of view. It seems to be more sort of people see it as more of a, in some ways, maybe like a tech company that's kind of giving you like an FAQs page on how do I do this and how do I do that. Actually, that can be used very, very specifically within e-com as well. So really good shout out for that one too. Obviously, outside of all of this with redirects and thinking about actually dealing with these and redirect change and stuff like that, category pages are powerful, like you mentioned. So for retailers, having category pages for certain strong categories built into the site that are SEO specific, that drive that sort of push into Google in some respects. Where would you typically sit those category pages in the navigation of the site, just to get the most out of them ultimately?
Yeah, so I think your core category pages, like your real top levels, your best sellers, your the things that really sell, you've got to be in the main navigation, as we discussed, and hopefully at least 1 or 2 linked to from the homepage. We really like, off the back of that, linking to relevant subcategories from within categories. So it almost acts like kind of as a filter system, but it's not a filter system because it does link through to the clean subcategory page. Again, it's good for search engines because they can see the relevance of the categories, subcategories. You're creating almost like a pyramid structure of your site. But it's also really good for customers to sort of narrow their search, narrow their interest. If they're interested in t-shirts, then you're linking through to different color t-shirts. They can refine their search, so it helps them get to find exactly what they want. For some products, we do like recommending attribute linking. For example, linking through from a product page, linking through to categories that are relevant to that product. So it might be like, I think an example I've seen before is a site selling wine. And so on product pages, they link through to the type of wine it is, the region of wine it is, the country it came from, which all exist as categories on the site as well. And all these things are just sharing relevance. I think another key area, as we discussed, creating content before, using content to link through to your category pages as well. Again, like really nice to share the expertise of the content, of the blog post, of the guide to the category, and also you're signposting your customer to your category pages, to your transactional pages from the blog. So you make it really easy for them to go from a informational query to a transactional query down the customer journey.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think it's interesting. As Dan's just asked a question to Dan, which is great. Just thinking about, obviously, he's just saying great info on redirects and stuff. He says, what's the view on pages that can be reached through multiple navigation paths, resulting in a unique URL? What would you do? What do you use for the breadcrumb effectively? Should you chronicle to the primary URL? And obviously, what about pagination in that process as well, kind of thing. So I kind of get where he's coming from. It's all kind of pouring in from, you were literally talking about it there towards the end, where it's coming in from blog content and it's coming in from product page content and it's arriving at a destination from multiple scenarios, which then could obviously, create, indexation of multiple sorts of sources for that page.
Yeah, no, 100%. This is a really interesting one. So I think there's a few different things here. One of which is, pages that have multiple URLs. I think often product pages, when they contain the category path, happens on there's options for it to happen on all the different CMS. I think Shopify does it by default, links to them by default. 100% make sure you have a canonical to your primary version. I'd definitely recommend that. You want one page to have all the authority, because you can't have several of the different pages ranking for the same term. So you definitely want your canonical in place. Shopify does it by default, canonicalizes to the simple product URL. So without the collection path in, without the category path in. That is what we recommend if we're working with an e-com site, is to have product URLs which are the simple version of the product URL. So whichever category path you go through, if you click on the product, you'll always get the simple product URL. With breadcrumbs, this is a tricky one. I think there's the easy way to do it, and what I consider would be like the actual optimal way to do it. The easy way is to select a primary category, subcategory path and have that as a static breadcrumb, no matter how you navigate to it. Obviously, that is not best for customers, because the customer wants to go from where they've come from. They want to go back to where they've come from. And so I think Magento 2 has it where there's an option to for the breadcrumb to reflect the path the customer took to the product page, which I think in theory is the best option for the customer. And Google have said that they can work it out. To what degree, I always am slightly skeptical, but they said they can work it out, and I think it makes sense from a customer perspective. The only issue with having that method is that if you go direct to a product page from the search results, often you don't get any breadcrumb at all, because you haven't navigated through the site, and so there's nothing to generate them. And so the ideal scenario is having a fallback option, a fallback static breadcrumb, which shows if you go directly to a product page, and if you navigate through the site, you get the dynamically generated breadcrumb based on the path you've visited. But I'm yet to see a site that's actually done that.
Yeah, but it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Everybody, all the retailers that are obviously watching on this, who could do it first? Who'd be the first to make that and make that happen, kind of thing. But I think it's a really good point, actually. I think it's a tricky one to kind of navigate in some respects. But I think by what you're saying is, canonical is the key on this one, and getting it right is, the even more tricky part of that whole process. But once it's implemented and working well, it's only going to give you a boost in the rankings. Obviously, again, a question just from Michal. What's your view on sort of user-generated content? Do you see massive wins in user-generated content? Obviously, we talked about reviews briefly. You touched on those, and obviously use reviews within schemas and stuff like that. But actually, from an e-com point of view, having that generated content from a user perspective, is it a great thing to have, and ultimately do you see an uptick in performance from it?
Yeah, I think massively. I think it can be really, really powerful to have on your product pages. I think we've seen big benefits from sites putting lifestyle imagery on the site. I think it's showing a product in use and showing what it's actually used for can be really, really powerful, really, really great. I think, would 100% recommend it. I think the only caveats are obviously having a process to vet that. So you're only showing there are some user generated photos that just look a bit naff, and so you do want to make sure you're showing the best version of your product. That sort of goes without saying. As well as just making sure that whatever you use to pull them through isn't having a massive load on your site and just making it unusable and really, really slow. But I think, I would definitely recommend implementing user-generated content like photos of the product in use, 100%.
That's good. I mean, that's 100%. Well, I mean, we're flying. We're literally out of time. I mean, we keep these 45 minutes because obviously it gets late in the day. Dan's just shouted out in the box, said thanks, Dan and John, and others, Shanti and others for a great discussion. And it's always a pleasure for me sitting here as well and watching this as we're doing our thing on the screen, but obviously you guys have made some really good points between Michal, Shanti and various others, Dan. in the comments box today as well. So really interesting, valuable conversation going on from you guys too. So I really appreciate that. James is another one. Thanks, James, for saying thanks. Thank you for obviously all of that. But yeah, time just flies. As I say, we're massive thank you for you guys that have attended today. Dan, I don't know if you can knock down to the final slide on the deck, would be amazing. Really appreciate that, and really appreciate all this interaction from you guys as well, which is fantastic, and taking the time to attend. Massive thank you to obviously Dan Cartland from NOVOS for presenting today, and you know, good healthy discussion and some really great tips. As I say, feel free to reach out to DeepCrawl. Do grab yourself a free consultation, a demo of the platform. Try us out, see what you think. Dan's a big believer. Obviously, I'm a big believer as users of the product. It really does perform and do the things that we would expect it to do. Remember to grab one of our ebooks as well. We've got some really interesting ebooks kicking around at the moment for e-commerce and Google's page experience updates and what that means for the customers as well. So feel free to grab one of those. As I mentioned, as always, there will be a full write-up on what we talked about today. Plus obviously a link to the recording of this and the Q&A and everything like that we've had today. That will be available on the DeepCrawl blog per normal, and will be sent out to obviously anybody that registered for this webinar as well. And please do take the time to fill in the feedback survey. It takes about 15 minutes of your time. We really do appreciate to get your feedback on the things that we're doing right or wrong, or any suggestions that you might have. But ultimately, my name's Jon Myers. Thank you for listening again to this edition of the DeepCrawl webinar. We'll be back again very, very soon, and look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thank you.